It's changed everything for me. It's changed everything for me.
Medical Dr. Tom Das from London, England.
I can't even put it into words. I mean, I can try, but it's overwhelming. It's just pure positivity.
He's talking about his own spiritual awakening, a personal transformation of immense proportions.
It's just immense beauty always. And in terms of my life, it's just made my life wonderful.
And what's rare here, this quiet, thoughtful family man experienced self-awareness without even knowing it.
My sort of, let's say, full realization or full awakening, that happened without me knowing. I don't even know what happened. I couldn't tell you what happened.
And he can't even tell others what happened, except to fellow seekers.
None of my close friends who I've known for decades or years, I don't talk to any of them really about this stuff.
Perhaps this is because what Tom has to teach, for most, is practically unheard of.
Everybody has full knowledge of what they are, who they are. Not Ted. Ted will never know anything. And Tom has never discovered anything either. Ted and Tom, the body-mind entities, you are God. You are the self. You are Bhagwan Ramana Maharishi. That's what you are. That's what I am. So you are all knowing. As soon as you go back into that knowing, which is what you are, then that's it. There isn't actually any fog.
For those who are looking to discover what Tom has found, it's pretty much up to you.
Whoever's listening to this video, it's up to you whether you want to teach or not. If you feel like a teacher is going to be helpful to you, then I encourage, and you think you might want to talk to me, then come along, meet with me.
And here is essentially what it boils down to.
Many people say they want liberation, but actually they want to continue as a separate individual, separate self, which is fine. But the reason they want to continue as a separate self is because they believe they are a separate self. So most people want happiness for the body mind. And liberation is not happiness for the body mind. It's the dissolution of the identity as being the body mind.
It is the dissolution of the belief that you are the body mind. Tom's teaching and the teaching of Sri Ramana Maharshi. Tom Das speaks clearly and directly to the choice before us all. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded on March 11th, 2023 in London, England, and Coronado, California. Tom Das, welcome to Souljourns. It is a distinct pleasure to have you with us. I've been a follower of yours for a long, long time now. I hope this is going to be a pleasant stay for you today. Again, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Ted. You're very welcome. I'm sure it'd be very pleasant indeed.
Well, I'm going to get started with something that may not be pleasant for you. I'm just kidding. I thought about the two most difficult questions I might be able to ask you. Again, these are not going to upset you in any way, but I am curious about them. And that is this: you are said to be an awakened being, which we'll get into in greater detail, and the language will be straightened out later as we go along. But you're also a medical doctor, I know, and you've been a medical doctor in London for quite a while. Which of these two, in your opinion, serves humanity the best?
Oh my gosh. Which of these two serves humanity the best? Well, for me, maybe I could answer the question this way. I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone, but I would say the most important thing is spiritual. Maybe that's the short answer to your question.
I think it's the most profound answer, and I know who it comes from, at least in part. One of your favorite teachers, Ramana Maharshi, would say that in a heartbeat if asked that today, wouldn't he?
And probably, I think he would. Yeah. I mean, the answer I give comes from, let's say, myself.
Well, we know how all medical doctors all over the world come to the aid and comfort of people who are suffering with their medical skills. How would you say you serve people best in a spiritual way?
Through just being myself.
But you're a teacher. Is being a teacher fulfilling for you?
Well, it's a sort of superficial label. Being a teacher for me is I'm very happy that, or I accept the fact that I am a teacher. What defines a teacher? Well, if you have a YouTube channel and you have regular events, that's probably the definition of a teacher these days, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Maybe a book, which I don't have. I haven't written any of my own books on this topic. Is it fulfilling for me? It makes no difference to me, to be honest. I never sort of started to share this out of a desire for my own fulfillment. And
Yeah.
in and I enjoy sharing these teachings when I'm sharing them. You know, maybe you'll relate to this somewhere. I'll be interested to see what it's like for you. But for me, when I'm actually sharing these teachings with someone, if someone's interested and they want to ask a question or they have an open mind and they want to explore what I'm sharing, then I feel energized and interested to share that. But when I'm not with somebody who's interested, then I don't really have much of an interest to share this.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a bit like going to, I don't know, a class on an evening class, or dare I say, even meeting up with friends sometimes. Sometimes I think, oh, I can't be bothered to do it, you know? It's not really something that inspires me that much, even to teach. I don't actually have a very strong desire to teach at all. But then once you're there, once you've turned up, once you've gone to the evening class, once you're with your friend, it's really enjoyable, really fun. But when you're not doing it, perhaps you're thinking, oh, you know, I'm very happy not doing it too. So that's what it's like. That's what it's like for me.
I've had a living teacher who's about half my age, who's been awakened for quite a few years. That's the word actually, he doesn't use any words. That would be the word I would use to describe him. Of all things, he was once an attorney for the United States Justice Department. And here he is now, a realized being walking among us. I get a big kick out of that. And I have written to him with questions on my mind on this path for several years now, sometimes on a weekly basis, and he would answer right away. And I asked him how much thinking went into his answers, which always seemed profound. And he said, well, none. I just write right off the top of my head, and I don't even remember what I said to you. Are you sort of that way too? I
Yeah,
mean, you got
totally.
download. That's a poor word to use, but it fits, of insight as to what it's about, and you just spew it out, not
That's
worry.
it. That's exactly. Someone said to me once, "Oh, Tom, I know how much effort you put into all these teachings and things like this." And I said, "No, it just spontaneously spews out, as you put it, to use your words. It's spontaneous response."
So let's get down to the nitty gritty before I go on to my second question. It's a tough question to answer, and that is, how do you refer to your own transformation, if I can use that as a word? Is awakening your word of choice? Do you have no words, or is there a different word?
I mean, I tend to use, there probably are certain words I use, but because, as we've already alluded to, what I do really is I respond to other people's interests, other people's questions, other people's curiosity. So I'm happy to use whatever words the person who comes to me uses. If I encourage people to use words that they find they enjoy using, that works for them, that resonates with them.
Yeah.
But for me, it doesn't really matter, because none of these words are correct.
Yeah.
All of these words have some deficiency. Usually you'll find that these words have something useful to contribute and also are deficient in ways. So recently I've been saying realization or discovery, or I don't know.
Do you mind if I
But
use the word awakened, or should I use realization?
I mean, I would have an issue with any word you used, and I'll be happy. I'll be happy for you to use any word you use. Like, again, even calling me an awakened being, that's fine. You can call me an awakened being, but it's not quite the way it is, really.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the substance of whatever word is correct to use, because this is my second most difficult question to ask you. I've been on this path for a long time, since 1989, first becoming a student of A Course in Miracles, which I did for a couple of decades, and the subject of non-duality. You're the very first person, and having been a journalist for 44 years, partly in the field of spirituality from time to time, you're the very first person I've ever come across that I've either met or heard of before, for whom I've understood you to achieve this level of realization in a quiet, methodical, low-key way. No whistles, no bells. It just happened one day that you became aware of what was going on. Everybody else I know has this grand fireworks display set off around them when it happened.
If what you're saying is that a lot of people describe this grand event that happened, and then, hey presto, they were awakened, enlightened, illumined, realized, self-realized. Yeah, that didn't happen to me like that at all. No. But, you know, you started seeking in 1989. I've been a seeker all my life, but the conscious seeking, looking in retrospect, I can say I've been a seeker all my life, or, as far back as I can remember. But my conscious seeking started just a few years after 1989, when I started actively becoming interested in spirituality. And I was seeking for many years, and I was trying to understand parts of the teaching, various different teachers and teachings, old and new teachers, teachings. I was trying to do various practices, meditation, yogas, this, prayer, this and that. So it's not like it arose out of no context. There was a context of spiritual seeking for a long time, sometimes very fervent and intense, and other times not really that interested, but it was always there in the background. And I had quite a few of these kind of amazingly big events, bright lights and some wow this and wow that, all these sort of things happening, fireworks. But they all seem to sort of come along and then stick around for some duration of time, maybe a few moments or maybe a few weeks or months even, and then they used to sort of fizzle out. But my sort of, let's say, full realization or full awakening, that happened without me knowing. I don't even know what happened. I couldn't tell you what happened. So that's the bizarre thing, because it's bizarre in the sense that that's not what I thought would happen.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it would be, pow, pizzazz, something like that. Bang, but this was different.
Yeah.
And it felt it felt, I don't know how to say it. It felt so right. It felt so right.
Well, that's key, isn't it?
I don't know how to say it. That isn't quite right, but
No.
it was, yeah. Okay.
I'm not where you are, but it doesn't matter right now because I'm on the path and I'm forever grateful just to be on that path. And the words I use, and it's only been in the last several years after having been on this path, the words I use is I feel a visceral experience on this path that I've never felt on anything before, and not to demean them in any way, shape, or form. But the teachings of Ramana Maharshi have forever advanced my understanding of self as I've never known before. And I want to be careful how I say that. But I also want to be careful about saying I've never been on the path till 89. I've always been on the path myself too.
I know.
I'd wonder,
I
who
know.
am I? Why am I here?
That's it.
What about? So we're similar in the respect that we've been on the hunt for a long time. It's just
Yeah.
that I think maybe you had an advantage. You weren't born in India, you were born in the UK, but your parents were, and I'm sure that tradition of Vedanta and Advaita might have been common in your household from time to time, was it?
My instinctive answer is no, it wasn't really in my household, but there is, I think, again, looking back, there are certain advantages of having an Indian cultural background. And what those advantages were, I think, was that the idea that there is divinity within us. This is a part of the culture, I think. A lot of the, I don't know about now so much, because what's happening in Indian society is, there's been lots of changes over the last few decades, but certainly what my parents shared with me when I was younger was that there are many ways to spiritual religious truth. And certainly the way it was explained to me is that Hindus believed that all these different religions can be a way to the same one truth or one God, oneness. But it's expressed different ways in different cultures. And this was a normal thing to think, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example, if I may, Ted.
Sure.
I can't remember how old I was. This might have been when I was a bit older, and I went to India, as we mentioned, I think just before we started recording, when we were talking. I said I've been to India several times as a child to visit family. I think I was about 17 or 18, and I went to India this one time, and we had in the family, there was a new baby born in the family, one of my cousins. And one of my other cousins was sort of, he must have been about 7 or 8 years old at the time. Yeah. So he was just a little boy. And he was by the side of this baby who was lying on the bed. The baby was lying in bed. And my 8-year-old cousin was just going this to him, just like almost like mockingly, or like not really understanding what he's doing, like he's imitating an adult praying. Yeah, he was just doing this. And he was like, Bhagwan, Bhagwan, which means Bhagavan. And I hadn't heard this word before. I didn't really understand what he was doing. So I said, what are you doing? And he says, oh, this is, this is God. This is Bhagavan. I said, what do you mean? He goes, children, all children are Bhagavan. All children are God. And this is a sentiment I heard many times before. Mm-hmm. And so once I understood what he was saying and why he was doing it, it made complete sense to me. So that's just one example of how this kind of way of seeing the world as an expression of the divine, even though we weren't a very religious family per se, it wasn't rammed down our throats. We weren't taught, we weren't forced to meditate or recite all the Sanskrit verses or be aware of all the holy scriptures. These sorts of cultural things, at least in my family, they pervaded the sort of social cultural milieu in which I was brought up in. I think that helped, because it meant I didn't have as much baggage. And many people who come to my meetings have got a Christian background or a Catholic background, and some of them tell me, gosh, I had these horrible, very sort of fire and brimstone views forced upon me as a child, and this kind of held them back in many ways. And not everyone, of course, but some of them have said this to me. And I didn't have that, and I think that was very helpful to me.
And I do remember also being a good little Catholic kid until I wasn't, that I learned from the nuns and the priests and the brothers who would teach me that don't ever forget that God is within you. God dwells within you. So that was, I never thought of that as non-duality. But it was a fast forward to 1997 or 8, when I made my first trip to see Sai Baba in India, where I quickly learned that one of the first things he says to not all, but many newcomers, is to repeat after me. I am God, I am God, I am no different from God. And he says, yes, he is God, but the only difference is that he knows that about himself and you don't, presumably. And that confused me and bothered me and upset me for a couple of minutes or so, until I really started to realize what he was saying is what you now know about each of us. I wanted to tell you also how grateful I am to have heard your story, that there were no whistles and bells of an ultimate sense that awakened you to your state of realization, because I think it gives hope to other people who have been on this path, working very hard for many years, that too can happen to them. Do you come across anybody like that?
Who have been inspired by me?
Yes.
What more people say to me these days is that the teaching I give is well, this is what people tell me is, and I'm sure it's not like this for everyone, but the good feedback I get is that what I share is very clear, and it's explain things to them, and not just explain things to them, but allow them to have a deep realization into what I'm sharing, very simply, very clearly, in a way that they haven't come across in other places. So that's the kind of feedback I get generally. And I've been thankful to get that for quite a few years now.
And that's absolutely true, because your clarity is what I think you're noted for among the people I'm aware of who listen to you and seek out your explanations as well. Yet on the other hand, I've heard others say, many others say, I don't think I've heard you say it, that one cannot will himself or herself to be realized, to be awakened. Yet you seem to have come close to doing that.
Yeah, I think it's the opposite.
You do.
It's the opposite. Yeah, you can only will yourself. You know, it's all a matter of will and desire, ironically.
Intention, I think, is a big thing for me. Where's my
Intention? Intention is desire.
Is desire. Yeah.
Intention is just desire.
Yeah.
Desire is energy. Desire is will, it's force, it's power. You know, so it's only through our desire for liberation that liberation arises. Because ultimately, we are God, as you say.
Yeah.
So whatever we want that's what we get.
Where are you today, Tom? As a doctor, as a husband, as a father, as a neighbor, compared to where you were before you became fully aware of this realization? How dramatically and in what ways, you don't have to name them all, I'm sure there are many, has it changed your life?
It's changed everything for me. It's changed everything for me. You know, it's just, I mean, I can't even put it into words. I mean, I can try, but it's overwhelming. It's just pure positivity, pure joy, love, happiness. Always. It's like revolving in love again and again and again. It's just like tumbling over and over, forward roll after forward roll, tumbling forward, head over heels in love, in a way that's eternal, infinite, and never fresh. It's just immense beauty always. And in terms of my life, you know, it's just made my life wonderful, wonderful. You know, blessed. This is available for everyone. You know, and so, you know, go to tomdas.com, have a look at the teachings and see if you're interested, and if you are, get in touch. And that's it, really. These teachings are there.
And I should
the way is open, and it is ultimately about desire and intention. When we want liberation, it happens instantaneously. But when we want other things more than liberation, then we get those other things instead.
Yeah.
So many people say they want liberation, but actually they want to continue as a separate individual, separate self, which is fine. But the reason they want to continue as a separate self is because they believe they are a separate self.
That's exactly, yeah.
So most people want happiness for the body mind. And liberation is not happiness for the body mind. It's the dissolution of the identity as being the body mind.
And that leads me to another point too. A lot of people are book knowledge smart about what it means to be awakened, and yet they're still not there. But that doesn't mean you give up. You just keep plowing through, don't you?
As you say, this is not about book knowledge, but this is not about throwing away book knowledge, you know, just for the sake of it, because book knowledge, conceptual knowledge is very helpful for many people on this journey. And for most people I come across, a little bit of conceptual understanding can be very helpful. But it's not about working hard. It's about working smart. I think that's an American expression, isn't it? It's how are we applying ourselves? Where are we applying ourselves? And if we understand the teaching, sometimes just a little shift will make a massive difference. If you're working hard, but you're working in slightly the wrong direction, you're going to veer off onto the wrong path. You'll miss the treasure through no fault of your own. But if you if you step back and understand what somebody like Bhagavan Ramana Sri Ramana Maharshi is saying, and we adjust our trajectory just slightly enough, then we can find the treasure with relative ease.
One last question, I promise, on your own transformation, and then we'll move on to other questions too. And that is, you mentioned already to me in private before coming on the video that you don't have any more questions, to which you're wondering about the answers. And that you can, something else you said too, that you just answer spontaneously too, like my does, without thinking about it. It sort of makes me wonder if you're finished, done, kaput with all learning about who you are. Is that true, or is there still something to learn?
No, that's true. Nothing else to learn. No, that's it. There's nothing else.
It almost sounds arrogant, but I know it. I know you mean that. But explain to people how that can be. I mean, we've got the universe of thought. The universe is a metaphor for everything to explore, and the dissolution of the universe when it comes to true non-duality, Vedanta.
Well, I don't know everything, like, I can't speak Greek. There are lots of things I don't know. If you ask me about, I don't know, baseball, you'll find my knowledge very lacking. I don't know anything about baseball, and I don't know anything about, I can't speak. There are very many languages I can't speak. So certainly I wouldn't claim to know everything about the world. No way, nowhere near. So in that sense, Tom as a body mind entity, as a person, Tom has got many things to learn, and there are many things that Tom could do better. Tom could get better at this, better at that, more skilled at this, more skilled at that. But that's got nothing to do with liberation. Liberation is not knowing other things, not knowing about worldly things, but knowing yourself. And the thing about self-knowledge is that we already know it. And it's kind of like realizing what you already know. This is putting into words what is beyond words. But this is maybe a good way of saying it. It's, you said, I think earlier in our conversation today, you said, oh, Tom, you know what you are, but I'm still on the path. Well, as well, I would just say, actually, you know what I know too. It's already, everybody has full knowledge of what they are, who they are.
Yes,
And
but
it's just recognizing that, not Ted. Ted will never know anything. Ted will never, and Tom has never discovered anything either. Ted and Tom, the body mind entities, the knowledge of the self-knowledge or knowledge of God knowledge, self-knowledge, which is the same thing. Being one with the teacher, which is the same thing as God knowledge or self-knowledge. This is already what we have fully, always. It's only if you think you're Tom, or you think you're Ted, or you think that you're a body mind, that this knowledge is apparently obscured.
And the reason for that is the nub of all questions, I think, that's important for people like me to understand. And I do understand it. For me, yet there's this fog that's always been there that's obscuring what you have found to be true about self. And as the fog goes away for each of us, we're all there with you. Does that make sense to you? For some of us, the fog just doesn't.
I mean, I would say, if someone said that to me, I would superficially agree with it. I'd say, yes, that's it. I mean, if somebody wanted to go deeper, we could pull that apart a bit, and that might be illuminating.
Pull it apart. That's good. Spend a minute pulling it apart.
Yeah, because the dualistic framework actually is that I'm a person. Like, say my name's Tom, I'm a person, and I have this fog clouding my vision, and that obscures the truth. And so when I remove this fog, then I'll be able to see the truth.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. But actually, it's not like that. Actually, you are God. You are the self, or also known as God, or also known as the Guru, teacher. You are Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi. That's what you are. That's what I am. So you're all knowing. And so as soon as you go back into that knowing, which is what you are, then that's it. there isn't actually any fog. It seems like when you identify as, when you think you're a body mind entity, when you think you're a small thing like a person, a body mind entity, and then you think you're Ted, and then Ted has to try and discover God, which is impossible.
Yeah.
Because God is too subtle,
yeah,
for the body or the mind or the senses. But what you are is not Ted. So, and you know that already. There's a part of you that already knows that you are not this thing, this flesh, bone, organism entity. There's this part, there's this intuitive knowing that you are divine already. And when you just allow that to, when you sort of light that spark, then this is when the true spiritual knowledge can start to grow within you. But not as Ted. Yeah. Ted will never, Tom will never discover, Ted will never discover these things. It's just yourself being yourself.
I hope you will acknowledge the courage, the degree of courage that you have talking this way, saying, for example, you are God. I think I'm only aware truly of my teacher of many years, Standing Sai Baba, saying that directly too. I mean, that's a conversation stopper when a person hears that for the first time. It's actually blasphemy when a person hears that for the first time. It takes a while to absorb the true meaning of that. So you're differentiating between it, which is what non-duality is all about, between the seeming mind body, Ted, illusory Ted, let's say, and the real entity who doesn't have a name and is formless. Do I have that right?
Yeah. And there are two blasphemies here. One blasphemy, this would be blasphemy. If Tom said, I'm this body mind called Tom, and I, Tom, am God, that would be blasphemy, because then you're saying that me as a human being, I am, that's like being a megalomaniac. That's like being a mega ego, a dictator. I am all powerful. That's delusion, right? So that's a blasphemy to say, I, Tom, the small body mind entity, am God. But the other blasphemy is to deny that you are God. And the other blasphemy to say, I am not God.
That is a blasphemy.
Because that's a blasphemy too. The blasphemy to say, oh, you are not God. That's blasphemy. So to deny the divine in within you, that's blasphemous as well. And to deny the divine within others, which is why we intuitively feel it's such a crime when one person, hurts another person. It's like, this is not right. In generally speaking, these sorts of things, we know it's wrong, because there's that spark of the divine in each and every one of us. But when we go much deeper into ourselves, we discover we're not the body mind at all. That's the illusory veil. It's not that the body mind, Ted, is surrounded by mist. It's the idea of it's that body mind itself is the mist. So when we go deep within to what we are, and we discover that, then we realize this body mind entity, Tom or Ted, this is a fiction. And it's not a conceptual thing. It's a experiential, we could say, even that's not quite right, but it's beyond experience. It's beyond experience, actually, because it's beyond time and space. Experience is a happening, a process that occurs in time and space, and this is beyond that. So this is why the Vedanta scriptures say this experience of truth is even beyond experience.
But it helps. It really does help. As long as I've been on this path, let's say, only 3 or 4 years ago, finding out about Ramana Maharshi's teachings, his real teachings, did I start to have this experience of this visceral change inside of me that I've never had before. And I tried to figure out what's different about him. The message is familiar. I've been studying it for years. I put it in my own words by saying he asks of you to roll up your sleeves and go to work, do something, do some of the heavy lifting, study these concepts, understand them, integrate them, let them simmer, let them marinate, as Muji would say and other people say, until they start to make genuine sense to you. It's a long process. And for those who are watching really and finding out who you are for the first time, if they want to find you and the clarity they'll find listening to you, it couldn't be easier. Go to YouTube, type in Tom Das. That's all you need, TOMDAS. And it's my experience that all these things that you're talking about going deeper, which are very important, and we don't have the time to do it right now, are there in convenient, clear, 15, 20-minute little segments that you do that I don't see other people doing, which is really good. And the title right up front, what the subject matter is going to be. You know your calling at this point, and it goes beyond being a doctor, probably, or a husband or a father. And I don't mean that to be
true. No, it's true. It's true. It's not something I say very often because you know, you can imagine why.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. It's beyond anything else.
And
And it's not a choice.
Speaking of that, you are a medical doctor by profession. You're a scientist. How does that category of humanity, the illusory humanity that it is, scientists, medical doctors, mesh or square with non-duality?
Well, non-duality is not a conceptual framework. It's not a topic or a subject that, oh, you know, how does this conceptual paradigm gel with that conceptual paradigm? It's not like that. You know, non-duality is just a word. And in some ways, it's a very good word. In some ways, it's not a great word, like all words. But it just points to this oneness that we are, the truth of oneness. And
So
because that is the truth, it gels with everything. Nothing is against it. So when you realize that truth, it doesn't contradict anything else in the sense of, you know, it's not and it's not unscientific, for example. You know, there's nothing unscientific about it. It's fully consistent with science. I mean, historically, in India, for example, it's considered to be a science. You know, historically, traditionally, this is considered to be a science. It's called the science of self-knowledge, the science of the self. They use words like knowledge. Science just means knowledge. The word science comes from a Latin word, from one of the Latin words for knowledge.
mm-hmm.
So science just means knowledge. And, you know, in Sanskrit, in this Indian language, Sanskrit, vidya or jnana refers to the knowledge of the self, or as well as scientific knowledge. So this is all, there's no conflicts between science and knowledge of the world and knowledge of the self, you know, although one is more profound than the other.
A current teacher of mine, the one I referenced maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, who has taught me so much, was the first person to invite me to explore, and you'll know where I'm going by saying this, chapter 26 of the Ribhu Gita. It's 45 verses long. I'll use my own expression, it hammers the point within an inch of its life that you are not this, you're a neti. You're nothing you can think of describes your essence. You like that. It's on your website, tomdas.com, I think. And when did you first become aware of it? And did it have the same effect for you?
The Ribhu Gita. I mean, it's interesting because, you know, as we're talking right now, I mean, I have curated that chapter because it was a chapter recommended by Bhagavan Ramana, who I consider to be my teacher, my guru. And he recommended this chapter. So at some point, you know, I must have been inspired to gather together these verses and publish chapter 26 on tomdas.com. I can't even remember it right now, honestly. I can't even remember the contents of those verses.
Well, they're all the same, except they use different words.
I mean, I couldn't tell you what I genuinely, right now, I have no concept of what is in those particular verses. Now, there are many other texts and verses that I do recall, you know, but so for me, it's if that verse, if that teaching had a profound impact on you, that's wonderful. But when you experience that truth for yourself, you let go of all these teachings because you don't need any of these teachings anymore. It is all these teachings come from a source that is within you. And when you find the source yourself, you don't need the utterances. You don't need to hold on to the utterances that come from them. So there are many people who are much better versed than I am in scriptures, and there are many people who are much better versed than me in Ramana's teachings as well. There are many people out there who can quote, oh, Ramana wrote this verse and this line and that thing and that line in that book. You know, sometimes I can remember these verses, but the Ruba Gita verses, for example, I mean, I must have curated them, posted them on tomdas.com, and then at some point forgotten them. And that's like many things I've read. I've probably forgotten, you know, 90% of the stuff I've read.
Sure, sure.
But if you read it to me, if you read the verses to me, I'd probably understand intuitively, hopefully I would anyway, what they're talking about, you know?
There's 45 verses, and clickety clickety click, they sort of go, and I'm just making this up so it's very loose. Abide by the fact that you are not your thoughts. Next one, abide by the fact that you are not your desires. Abide by the knowledge that you are not with form, you are formless. It goes on and identifies every aspect of whom we think we are and destroys it for the purpose that we've been talking about here now for half an hour or so. So for me, even though it's not unfamiliar to me, it's not even new to me. It's like a Gatling gun presentation that gets my attention. That's so remarkable. And people can find that on your website because it's there, even though you don't read the 45 verses. Let me ask you something that's been on my mind for a long time when I talk to people such as yourself, and that is that it's my observation that being on this path can be a very lonely journey. There's little else to talk about. I mean, I could talk about baseball. I know this much more than you do. I could talk about what favorite restaurant is the restaurant of the week. I don't go to restaurants. Doesn't have any interest for me. It's not what I like to talk about. How do you motivate yourself to go through your life when you can't necessarily talk to your next door neighbor whom you might really like and love, but he or she isn't on that wavelength? Is it lonely, or have you figured out how to overcome that?
Yeah, so I think it's different when you're a seeker as opposed to when you discover that truth for yourself. It's totally different. So certainly for me as a seeker, at times I felt incredibly lonely and isolated on the path. And what I did, and I think many people try and do this, is I tried to reach out to people I knew around me at the time who might be interested. I tried to have conversations with people and failed. Well, I didn't fail, but I failed to have it. It failed in the sense that when I attempted to speak to people about this, either we got into an argument or they didn't really get what I was trying to say, or they said, oh, wow, that's really interesting. And then they clearly were not interested and we never spoke about it again. And they were just being polite. So there was a sense of huge amount of loneliness and isolation because I felt somehow different to other people around me. And I felt that my interest was about something different to what most people are interested in. And so I tried to reach out to various spiritual groups. You know, this is throughout my teens and my 20s. And again, reached out to these spiritual groups, went to this group, went to that group, and I never really found what I was looking for in a group of people either. So it's very dissatisfying. And I was also, when I was younger, before I met my now wife, I was looking to have a relationship with somebody who also was on the same path as well, and that was very difficult. And I started seeking in my teens. So I used to meet girls and then talk to them about these sorts of things, and they never used to call me back. And I was, oh, what's going on? Why is no one interested in this? And to be honest, no one else was interested in it, especially when you're a teenager and when you're in your early 20s, same with any age really. But now it's completely different. Now there's no sense of isolation, loneliness. There's no sense of needing to talk about this to anyone. So I was telling a few people who attend my meetings, my satsang meetings regularly, in the last few weeks, I think I was talking to them. I was saying none of my close friends who I've known for like, decades or years, I don't talk to any of them really about this stuff, because that's not what they're just nice. They're just good people that
Yeah.
I love and care for. And that we don't need to talk about the spiritual side of things. We just, we could talk about anything. It doesn't have to be so deep anymore. When I was seeking, everything had to be much, because I was seeking and I was interested in spirituality. I wanted to talk to people about it. I wanted to explore it. I wanted to find. I had questions I wanted to be answered. But now, I mean, I'm just happy talking about the weather and with people, which is very useful living in the UK because we like to talk about the weather here in the UK. It's always changing and it's always a topic. And when I was younger, I used to be one of those people who didn't like small talk. I wanted to talk about important things, whether it was the environment or politics or religion or philosophy. That was kind of what I was like. And now I'm so much more laid back and, because I don't see anyone else needing this knowledge or advice. If they ask for it, then fine, we can have a discussion. But otherwise, let's just play a game of tennis and chat about nothing, and that's fine too. It's much, and I don't feel there's zero sense of isolation because it's total oneness and fulfillment. So it's complete opposite.
I want to say here that I'm envious of you and other people who are there, but I'm not. And let me explain what I mean by that. Being on this path, even before I learned about Ramana Maharshi's deep teachings that explains with utter clarity what this is all about in a way that was really useful to me and continues to be. In the last several years, there are revelations, maybe that's an overused word, discoveries, insights that come to me that have never come to me before. It's like, who wouldn't choose to be on this path with that happening, whether you get there to the grand prize or not? I take it as a matter of faith that, we all get there. We're all that. We've always been that and nothing but that. But to be in a state where the fog goes and have these insights pop up is a joy to behold. It's never boring. It's always enlightening. Nisargadatta has said, and I know you're a fan of his, he says, find a guru. He says, work with your guru. And I say, and ask you, is that necessary? Or is it okay to turn to the fact, as I see it, that you have ready access to the only guru that really matters, the higher self?
You can. The outer guru and the inner guru are one.
So does that negate the need to go searching up and down all the channels and all the books?
It does.
And all the retreats to find
it does. It does. You don't need an outer guru. That's the truth.
Why don't more people talk about that?
It's a difficult one because I will say that most people who come to me, they usually need a teacher. Because a teacher can be very, very useful. But there's a selection bias there. Do you know what I mean by selection bias? The people that come to me, that I interact with, they're the people who need someone like me. That's what they've come to me. The people I interact with, I often encourage. See, when I first started sharing this or teaching, I used to emphasize how you don't need a guru. You don't need a teacher. You don't even need to come to these meetings. You don't need to read these books. And now more and more and more, I'm saying to people, come to the meetings. Look at the recommended reading list on tomdas.com. I used to say, choose one book and then study that one book. And now I'm saying, choose one book. Take your time to work through that book. And then when you've finished, consider choosing another book on the list and work your way through all the books. So why is this? It's because It's true, you don't need a teacher, but the mind and ignorance and the ego, or if you want to personify it, the devil, is so tricky and sneaky that it's very easy to go off the path, the true path, but still think you're on the path. Very easy to just veer a millimeter, a degree off the path. You still think you're on the path. You look like you're going in the same direction. But again, if you carry on, that 1 millimeter, 1 degree difference will get you to a very different destination, you know, metaphorically speaking, 100 kilometers down the way or 100 miles down, you know, you'll be in a completely different place. It's up to whoever's listening to this video, whoever's listening to this interview, it's up to you whether you want to teach or not. If you feel like a teacher is going to be helpful to you, then I encourage, and you think, for example, that you might want to talk to me, then come along, meet with me.
Yeah.
We have meetings twice a week online. If you're in the London, UK area, we're trying to meet in person once a month. They are also broadcast.
I didn't know that. So I want to make sure people do become aware of that. They can join from any country, I suppose. You're 7 hours ahead of us in California. 4 hours for those on the East Coast of America. They could join.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got plenty of people from the US who come along and join. We meet twice a week on a Thursday, and on a Sunday.
Well, that's great.
Pretty much every week, online using Zoom. But then again,
Yeah,
you know, there'll be some people who will feel like, you know, I don't resonate with Tom, or find another teacher you resonate with. Or I don't feel I need a teacher. Well, you don't need a teacher. I don't know. I mean, strictly speaking, you don't need a teacher.
Yeah.
Because it's all inside of you. But the people I come into contact with, I encourage them. I think I find myself saying, because the teaching is spontaneous, it's born out of the person who's there with me. You know, the teaching is kind of whoever's with me, that will elicit a response from me, which is called the teaching. It's not something I remember in my mind and then sort of spit out every time someone presses a button. I just regurgitate a teaching. It's not like that. It's an intuitive thing in the moment. So I find myself saying to people, it's very important to keep on coming to these meetings. It's very important to keep on coming to satsang. It's very important to meditate. It's very important to read the texts. All these things sort of form they start to encircle the ego and crush it from all directions, you know? So it hasn't got a way out to escape, because the ego is very tricky, very sneaky, very conniving, and it often finds a way to escape. And this is where a teacher, I've seen how someone like myself can be very helpful to seekers, because I can usually immediately see things that people are doing wrong. And again, there's selection bias, because there might be lots of people who don't need someone like me, but I'm not seeing them. I don't know.
When I said this, I did not mean to have it be a reflection on you as a teacher or anybody else. I'm just saying that I think sooner or later we can all get to the area where we can enjoy the input from outside of ourselves, but we can also discover inside ourselves as well that takes us, which is very reassuring, to the same end. So your clarity has really been appreciated here today, as it is every time I walk down the street here in Coronado, California, listening to your talks, which are very digestible. I mean, the ones I'm familiar with are usually 15 and 20, 25 minutes tops. And I appreciate you for giving up your Saturday evening to be with us here on Souljourns. And I only got to half my questions, so maybe one day you'll consent and say yes again to this. Tamdas at tamdas.com. Thank you for joining us on Souljourns today.
Well, thank you, Ted. And yeah, just invite me back, and we'll be very happy to run through the second half of your questions.
It's helpful. It's really helpful to those I call fence straddlers, who have this yearning that it's palpable, but they don't know the direction in which to turn.
That's every seeker.
It is.
Every seeker has a yearn. See, that question earlier you asked me about desire. for liberation. You know, the will, desire. Every seeker has that, because that's the divine defining quality. So it's that will, that desire for liberation is there for a reason. It's because that desire for liberation is what leads to liberation, and you can't suppress it.
Yeah.
It will not go until we discover what we are. We discover God.
I can see we're going to have a lot to talk about. Tom, thank you very much. I really appreciate your presence here today.
Thanks, Ted.
Bye-bye.